Hi, this is Cathy Richardson, and I'm here with Heather Ferris, and we're going to demonstrate how to do a response-based informed interview around a topic related to social justice. And yeah, I'm just going to start by inviting Heather to introduce herself.
So I'm Heather Ferris. I'm a clinical counselor and educator and social justice advocate. I was born in South Africa and have spent the last 20, probably 23 years going back and forth to South Africa, working with women. Here in Duncan on Vancouver Island, I still have my clinical practice.
That's great. And just to be clear, I have known Heather for at least 35 years. And we actually, when I got my first teaching job at a school, Heather was working there as this counselor. And we kind of bonded and have had parallel lives ever since then. So I'm also working as a counselor and an educator, and one of the co-developers of response-based practice. So I invited Heather to join me in this interview so we can talk about a topic that's really meaningful to both of us, and that is how to support and be an ally to people in this struggle, people that maybe are even facing more direct or frontline challenges related to oppression or racism or colonialism than I live in my daily life, but I want to be available to support women's activism, Indigenous activism, and community-based healing approaches. So I'm just going to share a little model here that will guide the interview process and give some clarity to what I'm doing. So you can see this model here. It's called the response-based context, a conceptual framework. And it was developed by my colleagues involved in response-based practice, Linda Coates, Alan Wade, and Shelley Dean, and myself. And it's based on the understanding and the conviction that human interaction is guided by our need for dignity, and in some situations for safety. And that can be cultural safety, physical safety, psychological safety. And so we work in situations where people have been harmed or who are currently being threatened by violence. And so we understand that how they respond or resist is related to trying to preserve their dignity, because when we are targeted, it's actually really humiliating to be hurt or acted upon by other people. So I'm just gonna set up the slideshow from the beginning, if I can do that. I'll just leave it. And so the first thing that we look at is the social material conditions. And basically that's the background context. What's going on where you live? Who has the power? Who's more likely to be arrested or targeted for crimes they did not commit? Who's more likely, to be blamed? And who's more likely to have impunity for actually committing crimes? And the next little bubble says situation interaction. So that refers to what's going on right where you live in your home or office or community center. It's sort of like the subculture. If I go to work, do I interact with my colleagues in a way where we support each other, we're kind, do we have lunch together, and we really enjoy working with each other and we show that? Or do we work in a place where there are like secret insults or gossip, or someone might undermine you, or you don't really feel safe? That's the quality of a situation interaction. And within that context there, we can look at the actions of one offender. So if somebody decides to harm another person, it relates to this subculture or this context, because people are more likely to do it if they want to, and if they know that they could actually get away with it. So then we look at how the person responds. What do they do in these conditions when they're being harmed or targeted? And then what does everyone else do? Those are the social responses. Who sees this? Who's a witness, a helper, a friend, a colleague, a daughter? Like, what do other people do when they know that this event is happening? And then how does the victim and also the social responders then respond to each other, the other social responders? So just for example, if I need help and I go to an office and that person helps me, I can respond to their response by sending them a thank you card or some flowers or by giving them a hug if I'm allowed to. So in that way, we can see how life can be facilitated and smoother and safer for people, or how the social responses actually can make life more risky or challenging or difficult. So that's the kind of process that you'll see us going through here now. And so, Heather, I like to ask permission. Would it be okay now if you were just to share a little bit about what you're going to talk about today? I know you were going to mention Aurelia, a woman you have been working alongside for social justice.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm going to speak today about my friend who I met in 2003. And I'm going to describe, it's going to be a little difficult because a lot of things happened. And so I'm going to try to be as clear as possible in choosing one aspect of it so that it can be useful. I haven't prepared it in that way because I wanted to respond authentically to Cathy's questions. And Aurelia is a woman who survived the Rwandan genocide, traveled 5 countries with her children, and came to South Africa because she needed medical help for her son who still has sickle cell anemia. So she's very brave and very strong. And when we met in 2003, she and other women in her community, which was pretty much an informal community at that time, very rudimentary sort of shack type houses, where they decided the women felt very disempowered because there was no work, and in fact their community was surrounded, still is surrounded by mostly white people, or people certainly with employment and so on, very affected by apartheid South Africa.
Mm-hmm.
That's sort of the context. We worked together for a month, a number of women and such, and then Aurelia started with some women, started a community project called Love and Care Day Center, and that was to provide care for children and could in fact get work or have education or do something that would bring in some kind of remuneration.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm going to let you lead, because otherwise I'll just go on and on.
So you had mentioned that around Aurelia's community, a lot of white folks lived, and they tended to have, full-time employment and a wealthier style of life. And so that's sort of pointing to the current context of South Africa. And I'm wondering if you could just speak a little bit more about that, just in relation to what you would see as, colonialism or economic apartheid ongoing, or however you would formulate that.
Yeah. So when in 1994, when Nelson Mandela came in, it was a brilliant time, very impactful in terms of apartheid so-called being over. That was 1994. It's nearly 30 years ago. And to this day, many people have opportunities. There's a mostly Black government, but really the sort of nothing much has been reconciled. There hasn't been, the white people generally still own, more land, have more employment, and so on. The interesting thing that I find, and I want to just bring this in here, is that the idea of using the term racism is so abhorrent to white people that it's very difficult to work with it. And so this is something that really underlies some of the difficulties that that we went through with the situation in the last 5 years in that area. It's in Cape Town, and Cape Town particularly would look like you would see people of color living far away from work opportunities where apartheid set them. And those who can, those in this transitional government or through the transitional government, those that do have some employment have come a little further in. But if anyone knows Cape Town, Table Mountain is really, the people who live closest to the mountain where the city is are either white or people certainly who have managed to, have some kind of accruement of wealth.
Yes, I remember. It's a beautiful area with beautiful homes.
Yeah. And public transport doesn't work, and taxis. It's an incredible place. I love it. But the difference between those who can manage their lives with some kind of I guess some kind of relaxation or some kind of sense of not always being scurrying around trying to find food, trying to find money, trying to find work, walking miles because the trains aren't working or the taxis, and particularly right now, the cost of living is very high, even for people who are poor. In Aurelia's area, just recently 400 houses burnt down, and that's very common. So those are the day-to-day sorts of things. And her role in the community really has been as a mother. But I want to underline the point that she is still regarded as a foreigner, because although she's been in South Africa for 26 years, she is not seen as South African. She has all the papers and the registration, but she's not seen as South African. Yeah.
Are you seen as South African?
Yes, because I have a white South African accent, and I don't live in South Africa and haven't been there for about 40 something years.
Yeah, just interesting to see who gets the right to belong, right? And in terms of the situation interaction, you've mentioned that it's not okay to talk about racism. People don't use that term very much. Could you give an example of what it would be like, for example, if a white person got arrested, or a person of color, a Black South African or an Indian South African got arrested, how they might be treated differently by the police and by the justice system, just for example, to see how this works on the ground?
Well, the history, of course, is that if it's, and it's not just for South Africa, is that people who are considered Black or brown or indigenous have been targeted as people who, whether it's for poverty reasons or just plain straight racism, they've been targeted as people who are trouble. So they're either stealing or there's some reason why it must be them. So I would say that even the police in South Africa, everybody was affected by apartheid. So the police too are affected by apartheid. And so they're more afraid of white people. I would say that that's still fairly consistent, particularly amongst some and particularly in poorer areas. So people are arrested. And the story I'm going to speak of is about an arrest. And, I can't speak in general terms. I don't have statistics.
Yeah.
But certainly I can speak to things I've witnessed and things I hear.
Yeah, certainly. And, stories, narratives, they really bring home the points about people's lives more than statistics, which can be, manipulated.
Can I just speak to one other One other thing is that to bear in mind, and I've thought about this a lot, Aurelia was not raised under apartheid.
Okay.
So she brings a different sort of quality of strength to her interactions that actually, being a Black woman, disturb people.
Yes. Okay.
Because
Interesting.
she's not afraid to stand up for herself.
Yeah, and you're going to talk now about an act of perpetration and what you witnessed, but I also know that this topic has been important to you your whole life. And do you want to just say a little bit about how growing up there under apartheid informed you and what became important to you in this work?
So I was born in South Africa and spent 26, 28 years in South Africa. I was in my particular family, my father, my family on my mom's side had been in South Africa as settlers for 250 years. On my father's side, he had arrived in South Africa. His family had not lived in South Africa. My mom had been raised on a farm, and her because she was the last born, and they were, they didn't have a lot of time for her, so she hung out with many Zulu workers on the farm and had a great affection for people who were working on the farm because they gave her lots of attention. So in our home, we didn't have much to do with people of color because we didn't have people working in our home. But around us, most people would have had white people would have had people of color working, as working in their garden or working in their home, and probably living at their house raising their children. That was very common. That wasn't our experience at all. I had two incidences that really affected me. One was meeting an older woman in Cape Town one day when I was 10, who kind of looked into my eyes and asked me for some money, and I said I didn't have any, and I walked away. But what she was doing, I don't know what she was doing, but I know that the impact of it was that she saw me and I saw her, and it just struck my conscience, that something was going on even as a 10-year-old that absolutely shouldn't have been. And then when I was in my 20s, Macmillan asked me to come and invited me to write books for Black South African children. I said to them, how on earth could I do that? Because I, in fact, didn't know many Black South Africans, because apartheid kept everybody separate, Black ambulances, white ambulances, buses, etc. So it wasn't that people weren't there. It was you'd see people in the background. I had incidences in shops where I would go into a shop and I'd be the last one in, and all the people in front of me would be Black, and the attendant, the person working in the shop, would call me forward and I wouldn't go. It was very apparent to me that I couldn't kind of go along with what was happening. And so the Macmillan people took me to Black schools because they said they would introduce me to people and have me know them, and then I could write for Black children. I could do this just like within a few visits. I ended up having some of the staff to my house, which was illegal, put them at risk, etc., and realized that I didn't have a clue how to navigate this. I just knew I couldn't write for Black children.
Yeah, those are really powerful experiences. Hey?
Yeah, and it broke my heart to leave South Africa. It broke my heart. I didn't know what else to do. My family had all left. So When I had a baby, I thought, well, I'll try leaving and see how that is. And I came to Canada, but I didn't realize what had happened in Canada. So I've been here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're all being educated in an ongoing way, especially when we find more and more, graves of children, for example,
Yeah.
that we're all learning and shocked. I hope we are all shocked, but we're certainly learning. Yeah, well,
Yeah.
thank you for just giving a bit of background and also pointing to your own history of resistance against something that was very objectionable. So, would you like to talk about the incident that you had in mind to share?
It's quite a big incident. So I'm going to, as I said, I'll try and be really just hone in on certain aspects of it. So Aurelia, so one of the aspects of it was white helping, which I'm part of. And to be a white helper is a very powerful place to be. I certainly didn't enter it thinking that, but I know that it is. People were very poor. Or economically disadvantaged. So Aurelia attracted people to her because of her strength, and she also frightened people because of her strength, frightened particularly white people because of her strength. And her organization, Love and Care, the certain white people became involved, and it was helpful to her because they had lots of contacts and they could fundraise, etc., which was great, and they were kind. Unfortunately, at one point, somebody tried to take over. The way Aurelia experienced it was having somebody really telling her how to be a mother, how to be a, basically Black people in South Africa were ordered around. White people always knew what was best, so they thought. They never really inquired. And Aurelia was getting very frustrated with these white people because they, in fact, were interfering in her family. So the white people decided that they didn't want to work with Aurelia anymore, but they did want to stay with the project because the project by then owned land that was quite valuable. So they had a non-meeting, as in one white person took the three people of color off the trust, and this is fact, and brought in. There were two white women on the trust. One brought in her husband, and they went. How they did it, I'm not sure. But in South Africa, people are still very intimidated by white people, particularly white people who are powerful through financial means or through position. And we had one of each of those people involved. So they literally took the school and they told Aurelia she had to leave. And
who?
Well, the white trustee said, you can't work here anymore. I mean, she wasn't getting paid anyway. She had been working literally voluntarily. There was never enough money for her to be paid. But so they got a court order. She didn't know about this, but they got a court order to tell her to leave the land.
Yeah.
And so there was a piece of paper up, stuck on the fence saying, you're not allowed to be on the land. And it wasn't signed, stamped or anything. And she thought, oh, this is ridiculous. I'm the founder. I'm the person who's raised the funds. And this is totally accurate. And in fact, I'm the principal of the school and I have teachers here and I have 100 children.
Yeah.
And so she didn't believe it. She said, and she and I, if I can just explain our relationship, I was in Canada a lot of the time, but she would use me as somebody who could, if she wanted to figure something out or try to read white people, she contacted me. Heather, can this be? So I would say to her, really, if it is a court document, just be careful, because they could go further with it. And I totally understood how she was feeling because all that she said was totally accurate. Anyway, she did go on the land and they had her arrested. So she was arrested and taken, they took up the case at the High Court of South Africa.
Wow.
And she had to have an advocate. She didn't have money. So we tried to support from this side. I did a lot of fundraising all through the years. So the school had been going for, well, it was probably for about 17 years by then. And so they took it to the court, and we got a lawyer. And unfortunately, the lawyer, we're not sure what happened. So I'm speaking publicly here, but we're not sure what happened, but the lawyer just didn't speak up in court. We were paying the lawyer to represent her. And he was, in fact, part of the South African struggle. But he wasn't speaking up in court. So basically the court situation was being run by the white people and their lawyers, who were very high-powered lawyers. And the judge was actually really reasonable, a white judge. I'm using color here because this is really what this was about. It was about racism.
Yeah.
Anyway, the white judge had set another court date, and all of a sudden, what happened was the other, I call them the perpetrators, but so the other side, they managed to get another court date and another judge. We have no idea how it happened. So a court date was set for, say, February, the next court date, and they got a judge in just before Christmas in 2019, who actually said that Aurelia was guilty, and that she was sentenced to 45 days in jail.
Okay, can I just recap a bit? So there was this act of perpetration, what I called a coup. A bunch of white people tried to take away her role completely in all the work that she'd done for years and years. And so they manipulated the white court system with, their network, their friends, using sort of white supremacist networks to completely undermine the process and land her in jail for 45 days. And in terms of social responders, you were there helping, supporting, advising, and raising funds in Canada. You had a lawyer who had been a helpful person in the past, but didn't speak up strongly enough. And you had a white judge who was possibly able to handle it properly until that was usurped. Is that kind of
that's exactly what happened. And okay. It was COVID, and I couldn't get there. So I was almost out of my skin with worry. And the jail that she was placed in, they came and arrested her. Okay. And nobody seemed to know why they were arresting her. They didn't have the proper paperwork, and she was taken to a maximum security jail just before Christmas. And she went, and we were on the phone even as they were there. She and I were on the phone a lot. And but she didn't trust, she knew that as a white person I had more power. Yeah. And she did trust me, and she still does. But it was a very difficult situation for her. The community people were really very worried, because she was important to them. Yeah.
And the hundred of children too must have been very
all the children. Yeah.
Distressed. Yeah.
That previous judge that I was talking about, the white judge, she had actually got a group of people from the law society at UCT, University of Cape Town, and they had done a review of Love and Care and found that it was actually really good. There were things that they said, oh, you could change this or that, but actually there was real, where there was certainly they were impressed. So we'd been through that and thought, well, how could this possibly be where it is. And I also had a friend in Cape Town who went to all the court sessions. She said the lawyer would meet with the white lawyers and not with Aurelia after the case. There was something going on. I can't legally, say, but there was something going on, and there were many cases, not just in this case, where people are paid off. So I can't say that actually happened, but the news on the ground is, that there was manipulation going on.
Yeah, it reminds me of Canada, with the Indian Act and all that, using the legal system and the police to take land away from Indigenous people and give it to white settlers, and just manipulating every system to make that happen, while the people in power got very, very wealthy from these sort of so-called land transactions, to use a mutual term. So here we are, and Aurelia has to respond to this, I can say, corrupt activity, to being in a prison, to worrying about the children and the other teachers, and probably what's going to happen. And I could imagine that was a lot for her. So do you want to tell me what happened next?
So while she was in prison, just a couple of things in terms of her resistance. I mean, she did go. She didn't really have a choice. At one point, our friend Nontebeko brought her a meal, and she shared that with everybody in her sort of cell area.
Yeah.
She kept saying to us, just stay, literally stay present. It's going to be okay. She's a dreamer, and she felt like it would be okay. It was very terrifying for her to be in jail, because she was concerned. She had heard that they were actually trying to get her extradited, to send her back to her country. So Rwanda was her country, but she also had a parent in Uganda, so they were going to send her to Uganda. Well, that was her deepest fear. And her son was in a terrible state, because he's a son who's not well, and he's dependent on his mum to support him. So after 45 days of us trying to get other legal help, she refused. Part of her resistance was refusing to see her lawyer. Because she actually felt that her lawyer was in cahoots with the other side. And came out of jail. She felt really quite, when I say she felt paranoid, she said there were people following her. She was threatened. There were people breaking things around where she lived. She felt very intimidated, extremely intimidated. But what was interesting was that the school, so it stopped for Christmas, and the school, was to start up again in January. And the parents decided, all of a sudden, Aurelia's in her little 2-room, little kind of plywood little house, and the children are being brought to her house. They are being piled on her bed. I mean, she has babies to 7-year-olds. They are surrounding her house. The parents are refusing to send their children to this beautiful school that had been set up. And she said to me, Heather, the children are here. And she showed me pictures. It looked like a thrift store, because there was so much stuff in it, and they were all kids. And I said, well, wow, it's like, and there weren't 100 children there, but there were probably 60 children, right around her house, and the parents refused. So the white people, the trustees, we'll call them, I always call them so-called trustees because they nominated themselves. They were furious. They were absolutely furious that the children weren't coming, and they were trying to intimidate the parents to bring them back to the school. Well, the parents never did take their children back to the school.
Bless them.
And so my role very much was to understand court documents. She sent me absolutely everything that came so that I could, I'm not a lawyer, but I, would try to understand everything, and at least, and English isn't her first language. She's prolific in isiXhosa, but it's not her first language. English isn't her first language. I mean, she comes from Rwanda. So a lot of the terms and also the circumstances, like a court order, what does it even mean? How literate are we about the court system until we're suddenly in it? She's a lot more literate now than she was before. She's a very intelligent woman, trained as a teacher. So, I mean, I think the saving grace for me was that I at least had a job to do, because I couldn't go because of COVID. South Africa wouldn't let anybody in. And I at least could do that, and I could raise funds. It wasn't easy to raise funds during COVID, but we did raise some. I tried to report the lawyer and found that his wife actually was the person you had to report to at the legal system. So I didn't get anywhere with that. But then we made a decision that the land that Aurelia was on, my family had actually paid for it. It was in the name of the trust. Yes. So it was a little tricky, but we pushed for the trust to have the land put in her name, and they really could not do anything else. They had to do that because we had lots of correspondence and such. So the land was put into her name, and then we decided to build a school on her land, which was a small piece of land, but she built up, she designed it, she did everything, and she managed it, and she carried bags of cement up to the second floor and every night, so it'd be ready for the builders. So she actually has a school, and she has 156 children at the school. They're quite crowded. There's not a big playground. There's no playground actually, but they do go off on little field trips every now and again. So she actually has it, and it's in her name, and they cannot do anything with it.
Beautiful. So just to recap some of Aurelia's resistance, because I use this like the medicine wheel. So a spiritual act of resistance would be that she's a dreamer, she has visions, belief that things could work out. Like you said, she's from Rwanda. She's strong. She's not used to being oppressed by white people, so she's not having it. And she's also like emotionally making decisions. Like she has this, obviously many of us have an inner radar that, we listen to our body to keep us safe. But she's really using that to alert herself to the surveillance and intimidation and people that are following her. Like she knows it's happening. She's got a critical social analysis that keeps her going. And intellectually, like you said, she's a teacher, she's well trained, and she knows how to, work with you to find support and allies, and to help her use, that part of her thinking and mind and planning strategy to work the legal system. And then physically, just one example that comes to mind is like sharing a meal. I could just imagine her in prison, putting down a cloth, putting down all the food, making sure that everyone gets, an equal portion and everyone's cared for. So those are some of the acts of resistance that I see her.
And Cathy, I would say one of her biggest ones, and it's the spiritual one, she said, God will deal with them. Let us just deal with the children and the community. And her experience as a child being taken off the streets when their father had abandoned them, they had absolutely nothing. A priest had come along and said to her, "Why are you not in school?" And she said, oh, there was nothing like that for her. And the priest took her with permission to and it was so the Catholic Church had been, I know that they haven't always, they don't have a good reputation in some ways, but they had treated her very well, and in fact paid for her schooling, bought a plot for her mom to grow vegetables, and they had really taken care of her. and in fact, seen her through her teacher training. So that her experience of that, she also saw other things that happened, but she knew that her experience had been a little girl left on the street, and she had been rescued, and she made an oath to always take care of children in that situation. And so her resistance, it's nothing, I mean, it's nothing like what I experienced with that Black mother on the street in Cape Town, but she kind of gave me the eye that said, Heather, just know that this is going on and you cannot tolerate it. You know, it's almost like, you know, those early experiences that really touch us so deeply, I think, you know, seem to have a role to play. And her, you know, her ability to not get paid. You see, they couldn't do anything with her. They couldn't take her salary away because she didn't have a salary. She knew where her real strength was, and that was in the love that she could give and the organizational stuff. And she paid, she manages through the little bit of money that comes in, she gives the money to the teachers because, you know, so her strength is in her simplicity, really.
Yeah, and what comes to the fore for me is that idea of commitment. This is false idea that comes from Western psychology that says that people who've been victims of violence, they just carry that out. It's a deterministic belief. And it's just when you really talk to people, what you often find is when they're being hurt themselves, they make a commitment to be helpful in this world and to try to address violence and keep other people safe. And so I saw that with you in that moment of recognition with the woman on the street, and Aurelia's commitment to children. And so in addition to her own children, she's adopted 100 other children spiritually, and she's not letting anyone get in her way. She just keeps that commitment just keeps fueling her activity, right?
Yeah, it's true.
So those are the ways that you and her and all her allies, her people, respond to those corrupt social responses. I hope that there were some other positive ones there, but just hearing the story of how those parents, they all responded by withdrawing their children from school, going to the house. What a beautiful image of a room full of children around the house, all the children's things. And, you know, we're hunkering down here in support of this beautiful woman, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that when I heard that, I thought that the you know, the whole all the work, I'd been invited into this community in 2003. They, you know, they said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "I don't know." And they said, "Who are you?" And I just told them, you know, I said, "I like working with women." And I wasn't actually looking to, you know, I knew that whatever came up, I would go along with. But they said, "Can you spend 6 months?" And I said, "Yes, I can. I'll spend 7.5 months." So I was there. And just right from, you know, from that time in that community, I felt like the acceptance of me there. I mean, we were there because of the people, and it was about empowering people. And so when the parents brought their children, I said to Aurelia, everything was accomplished. You know, the people have the power. And that's really what I wanted.
Well, from an outsider perspective, it seems like something went full circle and you got to experience love and belonging in South Africa. Your home.
Yeah. Unbelievable. Yeah, I can't say that I did anything. I was receiver of everything.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to reflect on how helpful that you've been to me over the years, and that I also really appreciated meeting your mom and your dad and some of your sisters, and having, you know, a connection with your family. That's been really important to me.
Yeah, it's been important to me, and you taught me a lot when we were teaching together at City University.
Well, good. I don't remember, but I am just wondering, Heather, before we wind up, if you would like to either just share a few photos, or even just type a couple websites or something in the chat where if people want to get involved to support Aurelia and the Love and Care Center, that they would have a place to start with that.
Yeah, I can actually, do you want, it's heatherferris.ca is my website, and there's lots on there. So I have to just get to the chat. Yeah, oh, here we go.
Dots like that.
So heatherferris.ca.
Yeah.
And yeah, and then Facebook, there's a Facebook page for Love and Care Day Center.
Okay. Like this, Love and Care Day Center.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
Okay. Because it sounds like, you know, this is a force in motion. Love and Daycare Center is not closed for business, and
Oh, definitely not. But you know, another thing that's been really interesting is that in trying to help so many it's definitely the white way or the colonial way or whatever it is. It's many people see it as, how can I get some benefit? So a tax receipt or whatever. And what I discovered in my work is that there were no tax receipts, because as soon as we needed tax receipts, I'm not saying that's not a good thing. I'm saying, you know, yes, there should be tax receipts. But as soon as we tried to formalize and use that old colonial system, we had to do that in order to formalize that people could get tax receipts. And that is, in fact, what brought it down.
yeah.
So that whole aspect, now I just decided, you know, it's a place of love and care. You either get touched by it or you don't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Aurelia never asks for anything. She just says, yeah, we're supporting children. If you want to feel that love and care, you can be part of it. You don't have to give any money. You can actually come and visit when you come to Cape Town.
Mm-hmm.
In Masipumalula, by the way.
I will do that next time. I actually think we tried to arrange a tea for me with Aurelia, and it didn't quite come together. But certainly I feel like I have them in my heart now, and would just love to know her and be supportive in some way. So I just want to thank you so much for doing this interview. And, you know, before we wind it up, just from a meta perspective, what was it like to talk about the situation in that kind of response-based progression, I guess?
Because I'm somewhat familiar with the response-based work, I really respect it. I felt the strength, or even in my telling of the story, I felt the strength of the aspects of the story. I don't see it as a victimized thing. I actually see it as, I mean, I've always known Aurelia as somebody with strength. But even my practice of, I have a kind of Buddhist practice, and I remembered that it was so easy for me to hate those white people. And actually, that would not have been a strength, you know. My practice says, you know, they need support. They need to be held accountable, but they also actually need to be. They're also humans, you know. They also they're misguided, and so having compassion for them is also important.
Thank you. It reminds me of the words of Alice Walker. She says, resistance is the secret of joy. And of course, we didn't have to resist, but that if that's where our energy has to go to take care of those children and this beautiful project, it's not about wasting energy. There's always trader tactics, and you know, they're not that complex, but the love and care and the things you do to develop community, that's what really matters, right?
And the other thing is, we laugh so much. And that's really has been amazing. Yeah. Thank you for what you do, Cathy. Really respect.
And thank you, Heather. I think this is a really good place to wind this up. So thank you, everyone, for listening.